So thank you guys for coming to listen to me. This is my second time in Ukraine. I was here about 6 years ago. I was on my way driving an ambulance from the UK to Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia. Unfortunately, last time I was here, we'd spent a little bit too much time in Poland and we were in a bit of a rush, so I didn't quite make it to Kiev. So I was very happy last night to fulfill a long-standing ambition to have Chicken Kiev in Kiev. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. So I'm Helen Beal. One of my friends that I've recently made on this trip has just noticed that I have the job title DevOpsologist. Those of you that know DevOps will know that we're not big fans, if you like, of job titles in DevOps. So we're trying to use this more and more. We use it, all of us, in our organisation at Range 4, and it just means that we're people that study DevOps. So we're DevOps transformation specialists. We spend all day, every day, working with our customers, helping them apply DevOps principles to the way that they run their businesses. So before I go on, I just got a few questions for the audience, actually, just so I know kind of what we're dealing with here today. Who is doing DevOps? Who has done DevOps? Who is in a DevOps team? Who has DevOps in their job title? Okay, great. That gives me a really good grounding for where we are, so that's fabulous. So let's start with a little bit of I've got a clicker today. A bit of Dilbert. Hopefully everyone's quite familiar with Dilbert. I find this quite amusing because I live and breathe DevOps. It's what we've built our business on over the last 5 years, so it's quite entertaining when we kind of see it like this, and we've used flippantly as a buzzword that's going to cure everything, everybody. It's a magic bullet. Once you do DevOps, you don't need to worry about anything anymore. So let's kind of look into why that's happening and why people think that's the case. So I go into a lot of organisations where somebody's in a bit of a panic. The CIO has told them to go away and do DevOps, and they're a bit like, I haven't got a clue what the CIO means. But the CIO has probably been to a Gartner conference and seen some slides a bit like this. So these are from the State of DevOps Puppet report. These are actually from last year's. There's a newer one that came out this year. They've been going for about 4 or 5 years now, and they survey thousands of people around the world as to what they're doing with DevOps and what benefits they're getting from them. So your senior decision makers in your organisation may be looking at stuff like this and asking why you aren't doing that. So why aren't you deploying at an immense rate? You know, why your lead time's too long? Why are you not having great change success? Why your MTTR is so slow? Then we start linking them more tightly to the business goals. So you may be seeing that. Now, this is a chart that I have to update regularly. Not going to go through it in too much detail, other to make a couple of observations. One, I used it in a presentation last week and went, oh, it's nearly 10 years old. Because I always think DevOps is about 5 years old. And actually, to be fair, a lot of people count it from the DevOps days in Belgium in Ghent. It was happened around 2010. So in that respect, it is that sort of age. But it might have been going on a bit longer than you think. So let's take a look at this one in the top right here, and let's start delving into what's going on with DevOps and why it is so popular. So this is a very early slide I put together when we started doing this at Range 4, and this was very much what we thought DevOps was about then. So it was about this conflict between Dev and Ops. Basic thing, the conflict because the Dev team are all about change, the Ops team are all about stability. In most of Europe, all of the enterprise accounts that we work with have been, often we work with businesses that are tens, if not hundreds of years old, that have infrastructure that is decades old as well, and often very complicated and quite fragile. So the ops teams who are responsible for the infrastructure are often charged with maintaining that stability, having huge amounts of uptime. Sometimes even in their pay plan, they can be punished if there is an incident or if the uptime goals are not met. On the other side, we've got development being pushed harder and harder by the business to develop more and more. And we'll have a look at that again in a minute. All this comes out in some frustrations between Dev and Ops. And just a quick one, who's in Dev here? I'm expecting it to be most of you. Anyone in Ops? Those of you that aren't in Dev or Ops, what are you in? Architects? Other things? So big mixture in here. So the kind of ways that this conflict manifests itself is things like developers saying, oh my God, ops just take way too long to provide us with environments. And we heard a little bit of this from Adriana, actually, who was put into a position where she had no environments at all and had to figure out how to effectively develop her own or spin up her own. Other things we hear from ops, classic one is, oh my God, I can't believe development keep on asking for admin access to production systems. these are very, very common things. And we looked at the wall in some of the, I think it was in Steve's presentation earlier, so there's this big divide, and we'll look at why that happens structurally in a bit more detail in a minute. So this is a quote that I really like from James from Puppet, and this really explains sort of the next development, if you like, of DevOps. So it's gone a bit beyond just, can you still hear me okay? I could just hear a bit of feedback there. It's gone really just beyond kind of the IT development and operations piece and really reaching into the business. So we're looking at the whole value stream. So what DevOps is really about today is about concertinaing the time that it takes us to have an idea and deliver it to our customers and really maximize those feedback loops and keep that velocity going. DevOps has really resisted codification, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail when we look at Agile in a minute. But we like to say at Range 4 that DevOps is about making better software faster and more safely. And the and more safely bit is a bit that was often forgotten about DevOps a few years ago. So we had lots of developers doing things at speed and not always thinking about the security consequences and quality consequences of what they were doing. So this is a Google Trends graph, just to kind of reiterate that there's a lot of buzz around this term, and why is that? Why is it really popular? If you do a similar thing with DevOps engineer, you'll get a similar result. But the very basic principle of DevOps, what we're asking people to do is consider how their organization operates and consider what their culture looks like. So those of you familiar with DevOps, have you heard the acronym CALMS to describe DevOps? Few of you have. So CALMS is like an elevator pitch. So if someone says to you, what is DevOps about? Use CALMS. So it's culture, automation, lean, measurement, and sharing. So those are kind of 5 elements that DevOps is made up of. What we've discovered in lots of organizations is they may have done things like do some automation with a DevOps bent or intention with it. But maybe that CD pipeline hasn't been adopted by the organization in the way that they'd hoped for. And often that's because there are cultural barriers within it to having that proliferate. People aren't ready for it. They're not ready to make the change. So what we're saying here is that as humans, we live in systems that we've designed ourselves by our thinking. So even though sometimes it feels like you can't control anything, actually you can influence things and change these systems and processes by thinking about them and practicing them. So this is what a typical enterprise organization that we work with looks like. This is where a lot of our problems come from. We've created these bureaucratic organizational models which have all of these silos. So we've got a CIO at the top, then we've got 2 massive silos with Dev and IT Ops, and then we've got more silos between them. So this is the typical waterfall model. So people are doing design, then they're handing over into development, who's handing over into test, and everything's taking a long time. This slide is part of another deck for another presentation that I do, which takes us through the organizational adoption of DevOps. We will not do all of them because there's quite a few, but this first one's telling us a couple of things. First of all, that DevOps is often grassroots thinking. You'll remember from the short history of DevOps that, if you looked at it closely, that DevOps actually started as a hashtag on Twitter, and that's a very kind of DevOps thing that has remained. It's very grassroots. It often does, I've mentioned CIOs talking about it, but usually there'll be people within the organization that have identified tensions and conflicts and heard of DevOps and are already trying to change things. So these silos are really important because we've created them as humans. So another little pop quiz. Who can tell me what film this is a scene from? No, I did wonder how this was going to work in this region. So this is from The Big Short. Has anyone heard of The Big Short? So The Big Short was a couple of you. The Big Short was a film about the financial crisis. So what we've got here, Ryan Gosling's character is from Deutsche Bank, and the other guys are all from a small hedge fund at JP Morgan, who have put a massive bet on with Deutsche Bank that there's going to be a massive systemic failure around the CDRs, which are the mortgage bundles that caused the big recession. And what's happening here is the news is reporting that hundreds of thousands of Americans are defaulting on their mortgage, and yet the credit rating of the CDRs hasn't changed. And that was basically because there was some corruption in the system at the credit level of Standard & Poor's and Moody's, so the people that do the credit ratings agencies that say these are AA risks, these are double Bs, and that kind of thing. So they're really angry at this point. And a few weeks later, they go and see Moody's, and Moody's go, well, Standard & Poor's haven't changed theirs, we're going to lose customers if we don't change ours. So the reason I've put this up here is to show you some other human systemic failure and corruption that we managed to build in between us. If you couldn't tell me the last one, you probably can't tell me this one, but if anyone can, shout it out and you'll get a T-shirt. So this is Spotlight. This is a group of journalists at the Boston Globe. Spotlight was a column in the paper that they had invested in specifically to investigate long-term stories. So they weren't tasked with making headlines. They were allowed to do long-term investigative journalism. And what these guys uncovered was the very traumatic systemic failure in the Catholic Church in terms of the priests and the children, and even worse than that, the legal profession that were trying to cover it all up. So again, a bunch of humans spread around the globe that had managed to create a system of corruption and failure. This one is from a Netflix documentary called The Making of a Murderer. So this guy got framed, you think, when you watch the programme, for murder, goes to prison for about 20 years, protests his innocence the whole way through. You believe he's innocent. He comes out, and within about a year, the police have put him back in prison for another murder. And again, you think he's innocent. And this is kind of based in, that mid-belt of America, very, very rural. So I put all these examples up so that we don't feel so bad about the fact that we may well work in organisations where sometimes we just think, God, this place is just, why have we got all these processes they built? This is so broken. This happens a lot when we get a lot of humans working together over a lot of time. So chances are you work in an organisation that has some cultural aspects that you'd like to change, and some things that you think are broken that you'd like to fix. So I mentioned earlier that when we get asked what DevOps is about, we talk about it being making better software faster and more safely. We try and avoid defining DevOps though, because it does tend to mean different things to different people. So what I often find more useful is talking about what is different about DevOps and why it has got so much currency in today's marketplace. And I think there's three things. And I've touched on one of them already, which is digitization. So it's the digitization of our world that has driven the development people to have so much pressure on them to deliver change. So you've got businesses that are trying to compete with the Ubers, the Airbnbs, the new people coming through the block, or even your existing competitors. So we have a lot of insurance companies we work with in the UK. They're up against the retailers. So all of our big retailers in the UK are now putting their own insurance products on the market for home, for motor, for car, for pets. So it's quite a competitive landscape, and the way that manifests itself to developers is that you're getting an increasing amount of pressure to deliver more change. So that's the digitization element. The other element is tools. So we just saw Adriana's presentation. There's a lot of tools that have come out in the last 5 to 7 years that have enabled us to do things that we haven't been able to do before. Enabled us to work together, collaborate together, automate pipelines, and do things like containerization and microservices that have been beyond the realms of possibility previously. But the other one, because you might be wondering about the title of this presentation and what this harmonious polygamous marriage that is DevOps is, this is where it is. So we've got these three methodologies, Agile, Lean and ITSM, that are all coming together. They're all maturing and they're all converging. And it's those three elements together that we believe is driving the evolution and the principles around DevOps. Very early on, at Ranger 4, we were doing some webcasts with Agile experts asking sort of where Agile and DevOps fit together, and a lot of people were saying DevOps is like Agile on steroids. And if you think about it, what Agile taught us, it taught developers about velocity, it taught developers about working in sprints and getting faster feedback. But the ops guys hadn't really thought about that. And we'll look at this in a bit more detail again when we look at ITSM in a moment. So C.S. Lewis was a writer of the Chronicles of Narnia, so the Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. So not in IT, but I do like this quote because it does kind of give us this feeling that we need to take evolutionary or metamorphosize our steps as we move forward and as we develop. You can't switch DevOps on one day. You can't walk into the office on Monday and it's suddenly done. We have to take steps. There's steps in a technical way, or often things like CI/CD and then CDEP or C deployment. Culturally, we'll look at some steps that you can take to mature the ability to match the velocity and break down those barriers and the bureaucracy that you may have in your organization. So we've got this harmonious polygamous marriage between Agile, ITSM and Lean, which we think makes DevOps. So I just wanted to show you another quick Google Trends chart, just because it's quite interesting. I thought that when you look at it like that, you'll remember the big spike that we were seeing with DevOps earlier. But actually, if you compare it with ITIL and with Agile, you can see that it's nowhere near as popular a search term. And then if you look at ITSM, I found it very interesting that that was flat. And I found it very interesting that Lean IT isn't really up there at all at the moment. So generally, when we work with organisations, we're working with change leaders. So we're working with those people that have turned green, those people in the grassroots of an organisation that have gone, I can change this. Something is broken. I have the appetite, the energy and the motivation to help people see what needs to happen. That job as a change leader, and those people that have that appetite and the energy to do that work are quite rare, and it's a very hard job to do, and a lot of our work is to help those people remain motivated and help them keep on trying to make change in the face of what is often adversity. And I really like this quote from Alvin, who is a futurologist, because there's kind of an element, and if we talk again about control, if we go back to the Albert Einstein quote about being able to control what we do, there's an element also that you can let it go to the universe. So what Alvin's kind of saying here is everything is changing and the future's happening. So as a change agent, you can just kind of let yourself move to the future and bring everyone else with you. So you don't have to always put all of the change work on your shoulders. You can know that you're just shepherding you and the rest of your organisation in the direction that the world is turning in any case. So I particularly like this cartoon because it, again, displays what we see in a lot of organisations. So we go in and we say, we think you should make these improvements. These are kind of changes you make. Everyone's like, yeah, it sounds really good. And then you go, so you need to do that. And they're all a bit like that. So we get this reaction quite a lot. And I recently saw an update to this cartoon. So we've got the first two. Everyone wants to change, but no one wants to change themselves. And then everyone empties the room because no one wants to lead the change. As I said earlier, being a change leader is a really courageous position to take. So the DevOps Enterprise Summit that was in San Francisco, I think this week, and in London at the end of June, they were really focused on these change agents and the positions of jeopardy that people put them in when they're willing to try and make that change. And I think that talks a little bit to what Walter was talking about earlier. It's quite risky to take these positions, but very satisfying when you get it right. So let's have a bit of a look into these three things that make up our spouses in our harmonious polygamous marriage. Agile. So I can't remember which of you did it earlier, but you had like a maturity curve with the chasm on it, and you had Agile, it was you, Walter. So Agile, I think everybody would accept, is like 15 years old. Everyone's doing it to a greater or lesser extent. We walk into a lot of organisations that have been doing it, but have not yet made it a habit. So people say things about Scrum that it's easy to understand and it's hard to master, and we see that a lot. We see a lot of instances where people have tried a little bit of Agile and then kind of forgot about it. We see the same things over and over again, that people really haven't managed to arrange themselves in a product-centric manner. We see so frequently problems with product owners' ability to understand what IT are doing and why we're doing things iteratively. You can read all of these for yourself. Agile is out there, it's everywhere, but its maturity levels have quite a way to go, in our opinion. And this is something we see a lot as well, is this confusion about where Kanban and Scrum fit together. We also see quite a lot of Scrum fall and people doing horrendous things like that. So, ITSM, who in the audience loves ITIL? We've got one, that's good. Normally I expect none. So ITIL got itself a bit of a bad reputation because it was brought in as a way of trying to codify, to use that word again, what we do in the IT infrastructure world. But most people took the book and then rewrote the book and had this massive thing. And you're meant to use it in a much more flexible manner. You're meant to take the bits and customize the bits you want for yourself. So this is Woodrow, and this is just getting back to that change agent comment again. So this is the risk that we take as people that are trying to make change. You sometimes the easy way, which is the wrong way, rather than the hard right, it's the soft left, if you like, is to not put your head above the parapet. So in Agile, and I think everyone in the room is probably quite familiar with Agile and the Agile Manifesto, we value a lot of these things, and we do see problems in Agile development where people forget. Another classic one, it was probably on my list of Agile fails a minute ago, is people thinking that Agile means that you don't need to document anything. So it does make things faster, but then we look at this in terms of ITSM. So ITSM is like the next generation of ITIL, if you like. So ITIL being the IT infrastructure library and ITSM being IT service management. So what we tried to do with ITSM was make people realise that they didn't have to take the whole book of ITIL, but they could actually be more flexible and more customised about it. But it didn't really feel that ITSM was understanding what the development team were trying to do when they were trying to do Agile Development in line with the manifesto. So what we've done, and we'll reiterate this later, but there is now an approach called Agile Service Management. So you can actually use Scrum techniques to design and tweak your service management processes. And this gives you the ability to have your ops team working at the same velocity as your dev team and improves the collaboration as each team understands what the other one is trying to achieve. So you end up with a process backlog rather than a product backlog. You have an Agile Service Manager instead of a Scrum Manager. You have an Agile Process Owner instead of an Agile Product Owner. And you operate in the same way. So you design your services in sprints. You have a minimum viable process as your MVP. So Lean. Who's using Lean? Very broad question, I realise. So Lean is from Toyota. There's a lot of Japanese words in there, like muda for waste. It's taking what Toyota learned in their manufacturing process and applying it to IT. I was in a presentation, I think it was Steve's, I don't think he's in the room at the moment, this morning, and he asked the room who had used or knew about VSM. There was quite a small show of hands. If I ask the same question now, who's done a VSM, a value stream mapping exercise in this room? Yeah, so you're all quite new to it. But why Lean is really important is because it's about streamlining what we do, and it's about customer focus. So it's about eliminating waste. So value stream mapping, we've been doing it for a while at Ranger 4 because it really helps us help customers understand what they're working with from an ideation to realization point of view. So looking at a whole product's process, but it's actually higher than that. It's looking at how the processes link together. It also helps us write investment cases, so we get a very clear view on how much time is being spent on things. So anybody in the room read The Phoenix Project? I expected a few of you, the seminal novel of DevOps. Any of you read the DevOps handbook? That's very good, because it was only released on October the 6th. Did you get a pre-copy at an event, or you just got straight on it? Just got straight on it. So you'll know then, having read the DevOps handbook, that value stream mapping has also come up now as their main entry point into doing any kind of DevOps engagement, because it sets the foundation for where you're going with it. And this is interesting because, as I said earlier, the DevOps Illuminati has quite resisted codifying DevOps in any way. In the past, there's been quite big fights over Twitter when people have introduced training courses and certification and things like that. There's been quite a lot of very passionate opinion about what should and shouldn't happen in this space. And partly because of things like ITIL in the past, you've got, people don't always agree with the ITIL certifications and things that you can get. Some people have opinions over Scrum Master certifications. So there's all sorts of very passionate people out there. But the DevOps handbook has effectively codified DevOps, but that's no bad thing in my mind. This is a typical output of a value stream map. It's just an example one, but this is really important because it helps us understand the high-level processes, how they fit together, what the time is spent on them, and what you do when you do a value stream map is you spend some time identifying your current process, and then you kind of rip it all up and start again and look at how that process might look in the future. So, for example, we did one with a customer of ours in the UK, Vocalink, who recently were acquired by MasterCard. They did a project where they were ring-fencing HSBC. The banks around the world have to separate their investment and retail banks because they're not allowed to gamble with the retail banks' money anymore since the financial crisis. So Vocalink were basically separating the sort codes in their payment systems. When we did the first value stream map, and this is actually theirs, what we discovered is they spent over 300 days doing this particular project. When we ripped it up and tore it all apart, what we discovered is that they could take 7 change boards down to 0 and move from Agile to Waterfall. Just going to speed up a bit because I'm running out of time. And they could move to Waterfall. And that took the whole elapsed time down to about 81 days from 354. So there's quite significant change. So when we talk about value streams, one of the value streams that we could talk about is the ideation to realization value stream. So any of your product streams, what does it take to get from the time you've conceived an idea through your integration phase, and we refer to that as integration because most organisations that we work with do very little coding these days. They're mainly composing applications out of artefacts and using artefact repositories and things like that to contain them. And then doing integration using lots of APIs and going into third-party systems. Then we've got the validation phase, but actually totally agree with Giovanni that should probably be almost merged with the previous section. We need to shift left in DevOps, so we need to test as early as possible always. We need to build security in as early as possible always. And then we go into operation realization. In the past, when I've represented an SDLC, I've always done it as a very linear process, but what we've really consciously done is make it into a loop, because what we want to show with DevOps is the continuous release cycle. So we're constantly getting feedback. We're constantly going round and round this circle in a very iterative manner. So just a few words on the importance of culture and where we can go with cultural improvement. So has anybody in the audience previously come across the concept of Holacracy? So of course you have. A couple of, yeah. So this is if you take a kind of close look at this, you'll see this as our kind of classic bureaucratic command and control hierarchy. When you start looking a little more closely, you'll see there's some quite happy people at the top, and as you go down the different layers, they're getting a little bit less happy. And you'll see there's all sorts of different relationships going on in there that may not be reflected in the corporate annual report. And this is what Holacracy looks like. So Holacracy says, throw away that command and control hierarchy. Let's flatten everything down. And it has, rather than being a hierarchy or thinking of something like a machine, it thinks of things as a biological organism. So if you think of your body, and your body's made of organs, so you've got a brain and a heart and liver, and each of those are made up of cells. What we're trying to do here is think of those as cells and organs that we're putting together. So the human body doesn't really, some people argue that the brain is the command and control center, but actually everything requires everything else to work pretty much in the human body. We'll ignore the appendix and stuff like that. But it's this interdependencies that's important. So this is from a talk this morning. So I took a quick photo of it because I thought this was really important, because this is what we're trying to reverse when we look at doing things like Holacracy and doing horizontal authority and distributed authority. And flattening a hierarchical organisational structure down. So you feel, when you're Johnny in this situation, you don't feel like you've got much freedom or autonomy or power. And we've got the customers at the top. But the reality is, I'd like to, of course, this is kind of showing the money flow, if you like. But in terms of the person that's actually interacting with the customers more on a daily basis, I would argue that it's Johnny. They're the sensors that are either preparing the web application or they're on the shop floor. They're on a daily basis in contact with the customers. So there's a great case story in the UK. I've got a minute to tell it probably. We've got a bookstore in the UK called Waterstones. It was very close to going bankrupt. It got bought out by a Russian billionaire who tended to buy football clubs in the UK, but this one liked literature, so that was very good for us. And he brought on a guy called James Daunt, who'd run a very small chain of bookshops in London, wasn't very well known, and our stock market and traders all kind of went, what on earth are you doing? James Daunt doesn't really know what he's doing. He just runs like 6 bookshops. But what James did was come in and he said, right, in all of the stores, instead of me telling you from head office what books you're going to put in the window display, I want you to decide what your local market will enjoy. You read the books and you tell your local customers about it. So he made the people on his shop floors the sensors to the customers and gave them the autonomy to make the decision about what the customers wanted to buy and wanted to be involved with. And they've had a complete turnaround in that book chain. It's been very, very successful. So you remember earlier we had this chart. It's been through some iterations. So we've gone agile and we've become more product focused. We may even have tried to have a DevOps team, often an anti-pattern in the DevOps world. You have just created another silo after all, if you've created a DevOps team. Quite a good transitional strategy though, as long as you remember that's what it is and you haven't done DevOps when you've created a DevOps team. But you see we haven't got any ops anymore. Ops is embedded here, and this is Nirvana. And we haven't really got any management anymore. We've got sort of general customer innovation management. We've got some dashboards and automation alignment. There's conversations to be had about tool standardization. Should it be Jenkins or TeamCity or Bamboo or a couple of them? So this is kind of where we've got to now, if we look at this from an agile perspective. So agile development's been around for a very long time. Lots of us doing it. to a greater or lesser extent. Agile service management I've talked about, so the next iteration of ITSM. And then with Holacracy, what we've got is Agile organisational management. So I was at a workshop last year on Holacracy and someone came up with this. So when we're talking about what DevOps is and it being an evolutionary transformational strategy, this is where we're really at. So Holacracy gives you the basis to structure your organisation for evolution in the same way that Agile Development can structure your development organisation for that evolution of being able to think more iteratively. And in the same way that Agile Service Management prepares your IT Ops team. So I've got quite a few of these charts. There's lots of small words on them and lots and lots of detail. But if we try and give you kind of an overview, are any of you familiar with Westrum's organisational structures from the 1980s? So of course it's Walter nodding his head again, but he basically talked mainly about the red and the amber and the orange, and he talked about them as being pathological, bureaucratic and generative. So most organisations that we work with now are somewhere between generative or bureaucratic and generative. So they're on their way to moving towards these. So if you said red is pathological and amber is bureaucratic and orange is generative, most of you would probably put yourself somewhere between kind of amber and orange at the moment. The Ben and Jerry's type model is the green, and the teal is where we're trying to get to in our next cultural evolution. So we talk a lot about things like self-organising. Any of you that have been practicing Agile will know that self-organising is a massive underpinning principle of Agile. Coaches, what's the Scrum Master's role? It's a coaching role. So there's examples on there. I've mentioned Waterstones already. So the autonomy, mastery and purpose thing is really important as well. If any of you are familiar with Dan Pink, he does a TED talk where he talks about motivation. And he talks about external and internal or extrinsic and intrinsic rewards. And the conclusion that Dan comes to is that in the type of business that we work in, or the market that we work in, which is highly knowledge-driven with very, very complicated projects with lots and lots of moving parts, just giving us cash rewards isn't very effective. We need to create environments where we get daily intrinsic rewards, i.e. we are happy at being at work. And the three biggest contributing things to being happy at work are around autonomy and mastery and purpose. So I think it was Edward's presentation again first thing this morning where he talked about it's not about how senior you are, it's about the freedom that you've got. And I think that freedom or autonomy is really important for our ability to feel satisfied with the work that we do. So I bring Holacracy up because A, it's a way to improve and evolve your culture. And B, when I first heard about it, I was immediately struck by the huge correlations that it has with what we're trying to do in DevOps. So we've already mentioned self-organising teams, a big Agile thing. The no job titles thing I mentioned at the start of this presentation as not a DevOps thing. And it's also, the reason it's not a DevOps thing is if you're trying to self-organise, if you give people job titles, you're kind of putting them in a box. Whereas if you have roles, it's a lot more fluid and it's a lot easier to move around and apply yourself to different products and features and things as they come up. Continuous funding is a conversation we keep on having. And in fact, I've put a blog that I wrote up here. So at DevOps Enterprise Summit in June this year, I did a presentation with our customer Lego entitled this, Correlations Between DevOps and Holacracy. The blog that's linked there is one that I wrote following that presentation. Also at that event, I saw John Smart from Barclays put up a comment about how he had managed to go from 5% to 80% of his strategic change projects in a year to go into the Agile bucket, if you like, there. And I asked him a question about whether he'd managed to fund them in an Agile manner. Because the way that most people fund IT at the moment is on an annual fiscal basis. So you go through your annual budgetary planning, and you may be spending funding that's been agreed 15, even 18 months before in some cases, which is not really in line with the Agile principles of doing things fast and getting lots of feedback. So lots of organisations we work with, Barclays included, are trying to fund in a more practical manner. And this gets very much back to Walter's presentation around experimentation as well. It's the same thing. It's like we can't plan a £100 million experiment at the start of the year and expect it to be the same at the end. It doesn't apply to these principles. We're also trying to look at the amplified feedback loops, as we term them in DevOps. I'm just going to touch on that again in a minute when I quickly cover the 3 ways. But in Holacracy, we're talking about processing tensions. So we're talking about all of these doers that are hearing what the customers are doing, that are preparing everything for the customers, that are wanting to surface that tension and then bring it to the organisation and figure out how to fix it. Flattened hierarchies and distributed authority, very DevOps, and obviously the incremental iterative improvement. So if you're thinking, the Holacracy thing sounds quite interesting, these are 2 books that you can read about it. The first one, the Frederick Laloux, is where I first heard about it, Reinventing Organisations. It's a really good introduction to the subject. And the second one is from Brian, who runs Holacracy One, who's the founder of this thinking. It is very interesting. I think the market's quite early for it in many respects. The reason that we've been talking about it with Lego is because in Denmark, the companies tend to have flatter hierarchies quite naturally. I struggle with it in the UK. We have had chats with people like Ticketmaster about it, who are more forward-thinking. I personally think that the typical profile of an executive board in a company in the UK at the moment, those people just won't understand why it's a good thing to give up that power, and they just won't be willing to do it. I think the habit of owning that power is just too deeply ingrained in our education system. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see more and more of these principles filtering through over the next few years. So I'm not going to dwell too much on this because we haven't got that much more time, but this, I'm sure all slides are going to be made available so you can look at all of these orange practices and teal practices in more detail when you have some time if you're interested. So I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes wrapping up. Who's heard of the 3 ways? And it's probably going to be the people that have read the Phoenix Project. So the 3 ways in the Phoenix Project, they are the principles that underpin DevOps. The first is about increasing the flow between Dev and Ops. The second is about amplifying these feedback loops. And the third, and I just popped these slides in just before because I was so enjoyed Walter's presentation about experimentation so much, because the 3rd way is all about experimentation and learning, and it's such an important underpinning principle about what we're doing in DevOps in terms of being able to innovate. So just to recap, the first is flow, the second is amplifying feedback loops, and the third is experimentation and learning. And if you do experimentation and learning in your job today, you are one of the lucky ones, because most organisations we work with are still spending far too much time firefighting. They're not taking the time to fix fragility and technical debt in their systems, and it's something that most people are aspiring to these days, but it's very important to do if you want to thrive in the economy that we have now. So to sum up, this is the harmonious polygamous marriage of DevOps. It's lean, agile, and ITSM. All of those things have been around for a while. They're all coming together. They all have a common goal. And if we look them all up and wrap them all up in one thing, that's very much the overall goal of what we're trying to do with DevOps. So I think I have about 4 minutes or something for some questions.